Been thinking about Kevin Spacey though, right? It got confusing. I had a tweet I messed up with the old Vic and the young Vic. I wasn't quite sure which one's which one he was with. I was like, I'm all confused. Um, and that can happen with my all these things floating around inside this head. Um, but having come up in LA and being a young LGBT person, Kevin Spacey is somebody who's definitely known to me, just like other people who've been accused of violence or assault, or who haven't been openly accused of that in the public record. And watching the conversation with, in particular, with Anthony Rapp, who is a bi person, who's very been just great about being out and being awesome, and just really lovely person from everything I've heard. It's been really really tough because I felt um, like today's 2022. Like that's the year we live in. Yeah, I say it feels weird to me because I'm 42, and so it literally feels weird, right? And so it really feels weird for people to take 2022 and try to apply that to 1986, to 1996, to 2006. Even for myself, right? If I was like, hey, somebody tweaked my nipples, it's like that's because it's a really common thing in LGBT communities. And I do think that sometimes there's an opportunity for us to address the fact that bi people are less aware of the norms of touch consent as it's discussed within queer society. So, touch consent is basically this idea that in LGBT spaces going back hundreds of years, people haven't been able to openly express desire. So, the best way to safely be able to see if somebody was LGBT was to touch them in an intimate fashion. And if you didn't get killed or beat up or some terrible thing happening, then they were a person you might be able to sleep with. Okay, so that's potentially the most positive spin I could put on it, right? That many years ago, people felt like they were going to be killed for being born the way they were, the way I believe God blessed them to be. And so they felt that they had to very quietly address their sexuality in a way that meant that they would, have a hand graze the back of a person's bottom, or have a hand graze, or even grab a person and squeeze and see what a response was to elicit whether or not it's time to go further, right? And so, oh my God, you're gross. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. I was just playing around. That might be a common response, right? And so that's what a lot of people have told me. It's what I also witnessed as a young person, was seeing that happen. And somebody I knew in college went and got in a hot tub with, Brian Singer and experienced touch consent and was like, yeah, so he touched me. And I was like, oh my God. And we were like, what? And then we told some older gays, and they're like, oh yeah, that's just how it is. What are you doing in a hot tub with Brian Singer? You should know better. And we're like, no, they're not supposed to touch us. You're not supposed to touch people. It's and we were like, it's 1999. But so, and it was a thing where had a different opinion that if we were young LGBT people and we look great, you can look all you want. And many of us would say, please let us know. We're fine with hearing about it, right? But there was never an idea, 99, 2000, you should touch us, right? But we started to understand that that was a different reality. And I do wonder sometimes how much HIV was part of that conversation, as part of kind of the isolation around gayness and queerness, as far as people feeling like, oh, it's a danger, and I've heard, there's been some written about people like Elton John or Freddie Mercury or others who said, I didn't date women after HIV, and George Michael, I think too, I didn't. It wasn't fair. I wasn't really into them. For the most part, I'm really gay. But maybe they could have dated a woman once in their life or something like that. But when you have this specter of HIV, right, of people dying so quickly, you're thinking to yourself, most part, many people had told me yeah, I wanted to make sure I'm not doing something that can hurt somebody who has no part of our community, was how people put it, right? That these, you're sleeping with straight people and they're not They don't even know what we're talking about. They have never done the things we do. They're not the people we are. And so there's, I think, some dissonance, I think, at times that I think is important to recognize between gay and bisexual people that might be occurring within this, in the conversation around sexual violence, right? That someone like Kevin Spacey it came up in a system of violence that he calls his culture, right? And that is that a good thing? I'm not saying that is, but I'm saying, should he go to jail for touching people the way you get touched if you go to a club in West Hollywood? I don't know. Well, he grabbed a guy. The kid was only 15 years old. Held him against his body. That's a breach of egregiousness. Yeah. And say he does this. He got a bunch of other kids he's done this to over the last 20 years, that he's pressed himself against people. My question is, isn't there another path for us? Would you feel better if that person ends up getting help so they don't do that to other people? Or is it, we need to put this person in jail so that we can just keep it going, nothing ever changes? Yeah? That's kind of what it feels like a bit with this most recent kind of way that people are processing allegations, is to kind of believe some people, believe nobody, believe some, back and forth, and then a rigidity, if you will, around believing anybody who is accused, a celebrity, anybody who's accused an LGBT person, anybody who's accused a black person. So, and I just think it's really hard, but if there's physical and financial and real, monetary motivations, we can't ignore that. Right? And nor can we ignore the fact that, memory is egregiously imperfect. Like, there's almost nothing there for you people. You remember nothing. I mean, it's insane for a whole bunch of people who don't remember things to put anybody in jail on memory. I think that's going to be a huge reality check for us in the next 50 years as people really come to terms with, how much can be deep faked, how much can be changed, how much people can take and then turn into something else. And that you've experienced that and not even known it and been like, oh yeah, that's real. No. And how do you get, that's might be where, Zuckerberg is obsessed with metaverse, right? Is that it's something he can tell you is real because he's inside of it, even if it's not real, right? But at least it's better than whatever this has become, right? So I think it's really interesting, but I ultimately I'm kind of wondering, when we're going to have that larger conversation about how things are in LGBT communities, different than how things are in straight communities, and why they've been different, and how they can change, and how we may not feel comfortable holding accountable a 70-year-old gay for stuff that he learned 50 years ago. And, it still doesn't make it right. No, it still doesn't make it right. But it doesn't mean that we can continue. We don't necessarily have to perpetuate harm via an exercise of quote-unquote accountability. I'm very thoughtful. I'm very thinking about that as far as what does that look like. So I do think ultimately the Johnny Depp decision is probably going to be a good one, despite, my belief that, most likely there was some harm that happened in that relationship. I do think that's one of those things where being able to put up some sort of saying, hey, there are people who are not saying the truth about all the things that happened. And that can be super influenced by their personal experience of harm and trauma. Yeah. Right? So, being able to kind of parse that is not something that's going to be super easy to do. And I support Amber Heard. I support Johnny Depp. Both of them. I want both of them, not on my screen together, of course, but I would love for both of them to have wonderful, successful lives. Like, I just feel like that can happen. Like, we can live in a world where we can accept that people's relationships are really not what they wanted it to be, and now we're going to have something better for both of them. So I'm thinking about that.